There is an island, wreathed in the fogs of San Francisco Bay, that for decades has fueled fear, mystery, and legend. Its name is Alcatraz, but to the men who knew its cold embrace, it was simply the Rock.
Amidst the chilling Pacific mists and the unforgiving waves, this isolated outcrop hosted America's most dreaded prison. A place designed not to rehabilitate, but to break, to contain the incorrigible. Any man sent to Alcatraz understood the fundamental truth. From here, there was no escape. And yet, on a June night in 1962, someone tried. And perhaps they truly succeeded. To understand this defiant act, we must travel back to its beginning. When the federal penitentiary threw open its iron gates in 1934, its purpose was brutally clear: to incarcerate America's most dangerous men in a place from which escape was a physical impossibility. The walls were reinforced concrete, more than a meter thick. Steel grates plunged deep into the bedrock below, and from dusk until dawn, enormous searchlights relentlessly scoured the bay. Every single step, inside or outside the cells, was taken under the gaze of guards trained in a doctrine of absolute vigilance. Life within its walls was reduced to a brutal essence. A cot, 3 meals a day, 8 hours of forced labor. The sound of the ocean was a constant, haunting companion. A reminder that the second barrier, after the stone and steel, was the frigid, violent current of the bay itself. It's Rose, Birdman. But in 1960, a man arrived who was destined to alter the prison's very history. His name was Frank Lee Morris, a brilliant mind, an indomitable spirit. A few weeks later, he was joined by 2 brothers, John and Clarence Anglin. Raised on the rivers of Florida, they were tireless, powerful swimmers. The 3 men did not yet know each other, but fate was already setting them on the same inexorable track. After months of silent observation, the impregnable island began to show its flaws. Not flaws of engineering, but figurative fissures, visible only to the most patient and perceptive eyes. An aging ventilation duct, a predictable shift change that left a utility corridor unobserved for mere minutes, a shadow on an outer wall, just beyond the sweep of a searchlight. It was the start of something that, for now, existed only in the shared, unspoken thoughts of 3 future accomplices. The days bled into one another, slow and monotonous. But the night ignited the mind of Frank Morris. In the suffocating confines of his cell in B Block, he would listen to the steady breathing of his fellow inmates, a countdown until the night watch guard passed his door. And when the corridor fell silent once more, he would carefully begin his work. Behind the sink, he pried at the ventilation grill. Decades of salt air and paint had corroded the concrete around its edges. A simple tool, fashioned from a spoon handle stolen from the mess hall, was enough to begin chipping away the first opening. Each flake of cement was carefully pocketed, to be scattered the next morning in the dust of the recreation yard. An act of rebellion so small, so patient, it was utterly invisible. In the steamy, chlorine-scented air of the prison laundry, a few days later, Frank Morris requests a shift. It is there he finds John Anglin. There is no talk of escape. Not a single direct word is risked. Instead, a peculiar discourse begins. A conversation about the coldness of the water, about the treacherous currents, about the vicious eddies that churn in the channel between Alcatraz and Angel Island. On the surface, the phrases are banal, the observations of men with too much time. But beneath every word, a chilling calculus is at work. How long could a trained man truly survive in that water? How much distance could be covered before the bay becomes an inescapable vortex of ice?
From a distance, Clarence Anglin listens, his face a mask of indifference. But he is memorizing. He is connecting the points of this lethal geometry.
One evening, returning to their cells, the two brothers' eyes meet Frank's. The moment lasts barely a second, but in that fleeting connection, an unbreakable understanding is forged. An alliance is born. They will need equipment. They will need an almost inhuman patience. And they will need something to deceive the ever-watchful eyes of the guards.
Ooze from the mess hall, their edges slowly, painstakingly ground against concrete. Shards of metal, liberated from a decommissioned vacuum cleaner, and a primitive vegetable-based glue rendered in secret from hoarded starch and soap. With these crude materials, they fashion makeshift chisels, rudimentary drills, and, most importantly, they begin a macabre act of creation. They are building ghosts, papier-mâché casts of their own heads, scraps of newspaper, pulped and bound with their homemade adhesive, and given a terrifying verisimilitude with strands of real human hair swept from the floor of the prison barbershop. The heads, painted with grounds of stolen coffee to give them the pallid shadow of a human complexion, will one day rest upon their pillows. They will be the silent sentinels on the night of the escape. The security system of Alcatraz, for all its fearsome reputation, relies on visual checks every hour, not physical contact. A well-crafted illusion would be enough. It would be their key to buying time.
The digging proceeds in parallel. Behind the ventilation grills in each of their 3 cells, the concrete begins to crumble. The narrow vent widens, inch by painful inch, toward a forgotten utility corridor hidden behind the rear wall. Frank Morris works to a precise rhythm, a few sharp apping the bars with a hammer to check for tampering. He stops. He becomes stone. But during the chaotic shriek of fire alarm drills, he attacks the wall with a desperate fury, his work masked by the general clangor.
The Anglin brothers alternate, supporting their accomplice with shifts that avoid suspicion, repeating the same ritual with identical, fanatical precision. The year 1962 arrives, dragging with it a rigid, unforgiving winter. The temperature of the bay water plummets, hovering near a lethal 10 degrees Celsius, but the 3 men know they cannot wait for the warmth of spring. Every additional day spent on the rock is an unpredictable variable, a change in the guard rotation, an unscheduled maintenance inspection. Even a new inmate assigned to their cell block could unravel everything. The waiting itself could cause the plan to collapse, and by now, the plan is their only reason to exist.
By January, the openings behind their sinks are just wide enough for a lean body to squeeze through. Each man constructs a small, ingenious bellows from cardboard, connected to a plastic tube, to blow the telltale dust away without making a sound. During yard time, as the guards count the prisoners out in the open air, Frank's eyes are fixed on the central watchtower. He studies its movements, its patterns, its limitations. And then he sees it. An angle of view that cannot cover a specific section of the outer courtyard wall. A blind spot. He sears the location into his mind. It could be the place where they descend from the roof into the darkness. In the heart of the world's most secure prison, a map was being drawn not on paper, but in the mind. A testament to the unyielding truth that where there is a wall, there is also the dream of what lies beyond it. The raft was an act of desperate ingenuity. Before they could taste the salt of the bay, they first needed a way to conquer it. In the prison's maintenance workshop, the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, began to acquire their materials in secret. Bundles of old, discarded raincoats, more than 50 of them in total, became the skin of their vessel.
With stolen, waxed dental floss, they painstakingly stitched the rubberized fabric together. The seams were sealed not with glue, but with the raw heat from the workshop's steam pipes, vulcanizing the rubber into a series of crude yet airtight chambers. Little by little, an inflatable, foldable craft took shape. A vessel that could be rolled tightly into a duffel bag, disguised as nothing more than a common sack of laundry.
By the first days of May, their work was done. Every tool had been returned, every trace of their labor erased. All that was missing was the perfect night.
Frank Morris, the quiet mastermind of the operation, became a student of the airwaves. From the mess hall radio, a tinny voice crackled through the static, broadcasting the mundane details of the world outside, a world they planned to rejoin. He listened for key phrases: moderate currents, fog rolling in, a waning moon. The conditions were lining up, becoming ideal. And yet, he decided to wait.
He needed more than just a favorable tide. He needed a psychological edge. He willed the ocean to become just a little colder, for the water temperature to drop by another degree or two. He knew the guards, hardened by the bay's climate, would become complacent. They would look out at the churning, frigid water and convince themselves that no one, not a single soul in their right mind, would even attempt to swim in such conditions. The conspirators knew the truth. The temperature would never fall to truly lethal levels for a determined man. But the guards, they didn't need to know that. The fateful date arrived without ceremony, without a single pronouncement. It was the 11th of June, 1962. The three men, connected by months of shared secrets and silent toil, understood without a word, without even a glance. The time had come. At 9:30, the lights in the main cell block clanked off, plunging the corridor into a deep gloom. The papier-mâché heads, meticulously sculpted and painted with human hair from the barbershop, were placed gently upon the pillows. The bedsheets were pulled up to their chins. In the dim, ambient light filtering from the guard station, the illusion was flawless.
Shortly after 11 o'clock, the moment of commitment. The ventilation grates, their concrete anchors chipped away over countless nights, finally gave way. Frank Morris was the first to move. He slithered through the opening and into the service corridor, a dark, narrow gut of a space that smelled of rust and decades of dust. Here, the true sound of the prison was not the clang of steel doors, but the breath of the ocean, resonating Tulute's silence, clutching the sack containing their hope, their rolled-up wrap.
Before them rose a vertical labyrinth of iron, a chaotic spiderweb of large utility pipes climbing up through the heart of the building. Frank reached out, his hands finding a purchase on the first cold conduit, and began to climb. His palms slipped on the damp metal, but the fire of adrenaline burned away any sense of fatigue. He reached the ventilation shaft grate on the roof, the very bars he'd painstakingly sawed through in the preceding weeks. A single, sharp blow from his shoulder, and it gave way. A metal slat groaned in protest, then shifted just enough.
A blast of frigid, salt-laced air washed over the three men. It was the air of freedom. Above them, the sky was a near-perfect black. The sliver of a new moon was far too thin to cast any meaningful light. Their only enemies now were the sweeping blades of light from the guard towers, tracing huge white circles across the tarred rooftops before vanishing over the edge. Crouched low, the three men counted the rhythm of the beams. 1 beat of darkness, 2, 3, then a frantic scramble for a few precious feet of ground. In this desperate dance of shadow and blight,
They moved across the roof, reaching its northwest corner, poised to descend toward a hidden stretch of shoreline. A large drain pipe ran from the gutter, a 50-foot lifeline down the sheer outer wall. John Anglin went first, wrapping his legs tight around the pipe, sliding slowly, deliberately, until his feet touched the solid concrete below. He vanished into the deeper darkness at the base of.
Frank Morris remained for a moment, the last to touch the stone of Alcatraz. He pulled the vent cover closed, sealing the prison behind him, and with it, a life of certainty. Ahead lay only the black water, the rolling fog, and a legend waiting to be born on the outgoing tide.
Invincibility. It was the bedrock upon which the legend of Alcatraz was built. An island fortress, a concrete tomb sealed by ice-cold, unforgiving tides. But on this night, the legend is about to be challenged. At the stroke of midnight, 3 men move through the shadows. They trace a silent path along the disused asphalt track at the rear of the main cell house, their forms melting into the darkness that pools around the old, forgotten warehouses. Their destination, the island's power plant, a place of humming machinery and deep, concealing gloom. They press on, towards the northern shoreline, to a stretch of rock and churning water, where the gaze of the guard towers is weakest, where the island is at its most isolated and vulnerable. There, hidden behind a cluster of salt-stunted bushes and jagged rocks near the service facilities, they unroll their salvation. It is a patchwork vessel of 50 stolen, rubberized raincoats, meticulously stitched and vulcanized with heat from the prison's own pipes. A crude, desperate ark. John Anglin produces the pump, an old concertina, its musical soul ripped out, repurposed into a crude but effective bellows. He connects a rubber hose to the raft's valve. With each push and pull, the waxed canvas F hisses into the rubberized fabric. In less than 3 minutes, the main chamber is rigid, taut against his touch. The seams hold. Next, the 2 life preservers, their last line of defense against the bay's lethal chill.
A hurried, unspoken decision is made. Frank Morris grips the raft, steadying it against the lapping waves. The Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, slip into the water, the shock of the cold a violent electric jolt. They give the final, desperate push. In a matter of seconds, all 3 are aboard. The current, a powerful, invisible river within the bay, seizes them instantly, pulling their small craft west-northwest into the heart of the darkness.
Across the water, the lights of San Francisco appear as a distant, shimmering mirage, trembling in the fog. The wind is a razor, slicing across their faces. Salt spray stings their eyes, but no one speaks. Every ounce of energy is channeled into 3 things: paddling, staying warm, and ignoring the insidious whisper of fear that speaks of hypothermia, of sharks, of the crushing, absolute certainty of failure.
At dawn, 6 hours later, the spell is broken. A siren wails, a piercing scream that shatters the morning silence of the prison. The routine head count has come up short.
Coast Guard patrol boats carve white wakes through the grey water, their crews scanning the waves. Helicopters slice through the sky, their rotors beating a frantic pulse against the morning air. Back in Frank Morris's cell, a guard's flashlight beam falls upon the sleeping figure in the bunk. But the light catches something wrong, an unnatural sheen on the skin. He prods the head. It cracks. The grotesque caricature of a man, fashioned from soap, toilet paper, and clippings of hair from the prison barbershop, reveals the elaborate deception. The greatest manhunt in the history of the Bay has begun.
As the morning tide rises, it offers up clues. A life preserver is found, bobbing near Angel Island. Then, tattered shreds of yellow canvas, presumed to be remnants of the raft. But of the 3 men, there is no trace. The official theory quickly solidifies. The fugitives drowned, dragged out to the vast emptiness of the Pacific, or simply swallowed by the cold. But there are no bodies, and in the vast, aching void left by the absence of bodies, myth finds room to grow.
Of newspaper editors. Some claim the 3 men simply vanished into the fog, becoming ghosts on the water. Others swear they saw them, years later, fleeting figures in Mexico or South America, their faces glimpsed for a moment behind dusty, sun-bleached storefront windows.
Investigators chase down hundreds of leads, each one a dead end. The Anglin brothers' mother begins receiving postcards, blank except for a few words in an unsteady hand. "We are well." Were they real? A message from the other side of a successful escape? Or just a cruel, elaborate prank? Months turn into a year. The prison's director drafts a conclusive report. Probable drowning. The file is closed. But the story doesn't convince everyone. An institution built on the promise of certainty cannot abide a mystery. A prison defined as inescapable cannot admit its own defeat. In 1963, just over a year after the escape, Alcatraz closes its gates for the last time. The official reason, printed in the day's headlines, is the exorbitant operating costs. But many suspect the truth is more profound. That the escape of 3 determined men had done more damage than any riot. It had undermined the very reputation of the penitentiary, a wound from which it could never recover.
They didn't just break out of a prison. They broke the idea of the prison itself. And in doing so, they left behind not a solution, but a question. A question that still echoes in the empty cells and across the cold waters of the bay. It asks us whether a man is ever truly captive, so long as the dream of the opposite shore remains.
The years bled into decades. In 1979, with no bodies recovered and no definitive proof of death, the Federal Bureau of Investigation officially closed the case. The files were archived, a cold, bureaucratic end to a story that refused to die. Then, in 2013, a ghost emerged from the past. A letter attributed to John Anglin surfaced. It read, "We made it." It claimed Frank had died in 2008 and Clarence in 2011. "I am 79 years old," the author wrote, "and I need medical care." Forensic experts descended upon the evidence, scrutinizing the ink, the penmanship, the faint trace of DNA on a postage stamp. The verdict was inconclusive. The mystery.
Today, Alcatraz is a monument to its own past. Tourists walk the cold corridors, guided by recorded sounds that echo through time. The heavy tread of guards, the disembodied voice of a long-dead prisoner, the final, soul-shaking clang of iron doors. But in front of the cells of Morris and the Anglin brothers, a different kind of silence falls. Visitors stop. They stare into the void, imagining the loosened grill, the desperate climb into the darkness, the makeshift raft pushed into the freezing water. Some smile at the audacity of it all. Others stand in solemn quiet. Here, everyone must decide for themselves whether to believe the legend or the official report. And perhaps that is how it should be. Because Alcatraz, before it was ever stone and mortar, was an idea, the very concept of an impassable frontier. The feet of those 3 men fractured that idea, proving that even in a place engineered to extinguish all hope, the certainty of freedom can take root. The rock still keeps its vigil over the bay. Every night, the lights of San Francisco glitter across the water, a constant, shimmering invitation.
One has to wonder, did one of the fugitives from somewhere safe and hidden ever look back at those same lights? Did he remember the rush of the wind on the rooftop, the sting of salt spray on his skin, the furious, hammering pulse in his chest as the raft slipped into the vast, unforgiving unknown?
Their story continues to whisper a timeless truth, that no prison is truly eternal when human ingenuity and the sheer force of will collide. And so, shrouded in the bay's iconic fog, Alcatraz endures, not as a monument to fear, but as the enduring echo of an impossible dream.